Hey, you. Ever get that feeling like you're on a roller coaster that just keeps speeding up?
Uh-huh.
The world's throwing so much at us. It can be, well, tough to really get a handle on what's important, right?
Absolutely. Information overload is real.
Well, you've landed in the right place. This is the deep dive, and we're your shortcut to cutting through the noise.
Yep.
You send us the stuff you're trying to wrap your head around, and we pull out the golden nuggets, the insights that truly matter, all without making your brain feel like it's doing, mental gymnastics.
And today, wow, we have a fantastic set of material from one of you listeners, a really forward-thinking exploration of how societies change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the potential for some truly amazing transformations. Our mission on this deep dive is to unpack these progressive, almost futuristic ideas with a real sense of optimism and energy.
Love that. Optimism and energy.
We're talking about understanding the engine of social evolution and where it might be taking us, in the most positive way possible.
Okay, so let's dive right into this core idea. How does society actually shift and evolve? The text talks about these interconnected psychic waves flowing through us all.
Exactly. Driven by this deep-seated human desire for connection, for unity, really, and inspired by some really high-minded ideals. It's like society isn't just a collection of buildings and laws, but this living, breathing network of shared aspirations.
That makes sense. It's more organic.
It is. And what's so vital to grasp is that this isn't static. The text makes it crystal clear. Inertia means death for any social structure that tries to stay frozen in time.
Right. Think about it. History is littered with empires and ways of life that just crumbled because they couldn't adapt,
Precisely. So social movement, then, is this constant rhythm. It's about breaking down what's not working anymore.
Dismantling the old stuff.
Yeah, the static structures and building something better, something more dynamic.
It's almost like a societal spring cleaning, constantly making space for new growth. It feels like that sometimes.
That's a great way to put it. And when you look back, the pace of this change has been breathtaking, hasn't it?
Incredible.
The text highlights how the last couple of centuries have seen this unbelievable acceleration.
And it's just even faster changes are coming.
That's what it says, which really makes you think about the kind of world our kids and grandkids will inherit.
Wow. Okay, so that speed, that dynamism, brings us to this concept of viplava, or what we might understand as revolution.
Yes, but this isn't just about, say, changing who's in charge politically. The text presents it as something more fundamental.
More scientific, almost.
Kind of, yeah. A scientific process of social change involving deep shifts in how we think and how we act, both as individuals and, crucially, as a collective.
Right, and let's talk revolution in Prout's terms. Our sources mention the Sanskrit word viplava. What's that about?
Right, viplava. It basically means applying tremendous force to speed up the social cycle.
So consciously giving society a push, a big push.
Exactly.
Definition of revolution is fascinating. The application of tremendous force to accelerate the speed of the social cycle.
Now, tremendous force. That sounds intense.
It does, and our minds might jump to conflict, violence maybe. But it sounds like this can also be the incredible power of a game-changing idea, Something that just grabs hold of the collective imagination.
Or a massive social movement that just demands change. Right? It's about any powerful catalyst for progress. It doesn't have to be physical force.
So it's about overcoming that stagnation, that inertia, with a real surge of energy and forward momentum.
Exactly. And on the flip side, the text also talks about counter-revolution.
Ah, the opposite.
Yeah, that same kind of intense force, but applied to try and rewind the clock, basically.
Yeah.
To push society backwards.
Gotcha. So the real goal of a positive revolution is to break through those barriers holding us back.
The ones causing stagnation.
And propel us into the next, more evolved stage of society. And here's the optimistic part I like. While there's a natural flow to how society changes, the text suggests our conscious efforts.
Our actions.
To fight against injustice and exploitation can actually speed up that positive progress.
Yes. We're not just passive observers sitting on the sidelines. We can be active agents of change.
I love that. So what are the signs? What comes together during these revolutionary times?
Well, the text points to several key ingredients. First, a widespread feeling of enough is enough regarding exploitation. People just get fed up.
You see that bubbling up?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Then, a fundamental rejection of the status quo. People stop believing the old ways work.
And then there's often a clash, right?
A powerful clash, yeah. Between those working for the greater good and those clinging to old, harmful systems.
And finally,
a deep, collective yearning for a new way of thinking and being, a desire for a whole new collective psychology.
It feels like we're seeing echoes of that in the world around us right now, doesn't it?
It really does. The text argues quite strongly that humanity has reached another critical turning point.
Why now, specifically?
It highlights the alarming levels of inequality and exploitation that exist globally. It feels very current.
It almost feels like those historical moments where, pivotal figures emerged, leaders who could guide society towards a better path.
That's a crucial point the text makes. It suggests we're in a moment that calls for, and I quote, mighty personalities with a comprehensive ideology.
Okay, unpack that. Mighty personalities.
People with a clear vision, a powerful set of ideas who can really help steer humanity towards a more positive and equitable future.
So not just power, but vision and ethics.
Exactly. It's a call for proactive, ethical leadership with a real understanding of the challenges and, importantly, the opportunities ahead.
Now, the text introduces this really interesting concept of the social cycle.
Right. Driven by these four main collective psychologies.
The terms are Shudra, Kshatriya, Vipra, Vaeshya. And it's super important to stress, as the text does repeatedly, this has absolutely nothing to do with casteism.
Absolutely crucial. This is purely about psychological tendencies, the dominant mindset in society at different times. Not about birth or social hierarchy in that rigid sense.
Okay, good. So let's break them down. Shudra.
Think of it as the primary driving force being focused on the material world. There's a reliance on physical labor, on manual power for security and well-being.
Makes sense. Then, Kshatriya.
Here, the focus shifts to controlling those material forces. It values physical strength, courage, leadership. Think warriors, rulers, protectors. Power through action.
Okay. And Vipra.
This mentality prioritizes intellect and knowledge. Control comes through intellectual acumen, through ideas, philosophy, strategy. Think scholars, priests, advisors.
Right. And finally, Vaeshya.
This mentality is driven by the accumulation of wealth and material possessions. Pleasure comes from having things, and often influence is wielded indirectly through economic power. Think merchants, capitalists, financiers.
It's like different chapters in a society's story, each with a different dominant theme or focus.
Exactly. And what's particularly insightful is the idea that these mentalities tend to follow a kind of historical progression.
That's cycle.
Cycle, yeah. The text suggests a natural flow, maybe starting with that more basic, perhaps primitive Shudra focus.
Focused on survival?
Right. Moving into a Startraya era, an age of heroes, kings, empires, then into a Vipra age where intellectuals, priests, thinkers hold more sway.
And eventually
Into a Vaeshya era, where economic power becomes dominant. And the text notes, this stage carries a significant risk of extreme exploitation.
That feels familiar, unfortunately.
It does. And while the text suggests these natural transitions between the Kshatriya, Vipra, and Vaeshya phases can happen,
There's a catch.
there's a catch.
Yeah.
It makes a really strong point that getting rid of that deep-seated Vaeshya exploitation, that inequality where wealth is concentrated and used to control others, that requires a significant push.
That tremendous force again.
Exactly. It doesn't just fade away on its own. It needs active intervention.
Why is it so persistent?
Because under a dominant Vaeshya mentality, even those with Kshatriya and Vipra tendencies, people who value courage, action, intellectual pursuits, they can become, in the text's words, disgruntled slaves.
Wow, disgruntled slaves.
Or Viksobdashudras. Think of highly skilled workers, brilliant thinkers, creative people feeling trapped and exploited by a system that only values profit above all else. Their skills aren't truly valued for what they are.
I can definitely see that. People feeling undervalued and misused.
Precisely. Yeah. And it's this group, the Viksobdashudras, those who feel the injustice keenly, but also have the intellectual tools and the drive for action that the text identifies as having a special role.
What role?
A revolutionary distinction. They're the ones who can articulate the widespread frustration, give voice to it, and really mobilize people for meaningful change. They become the catalysts.
So they bridge the gap between the feeling of exploitation and the action needed.
You could say that. Which leads us to the idea of the Shudras revolution.
Oh, okay.
The text frames this as a necessary step to dismantle systems of capitalist exploitation. It's powered by the collective energy of these disgruntled workers, the Viksobdashudras, and those who stand in solidarity with them.
But it's important, you said, that while it's called a Shudra revolution, the real leadership often comes from
From those Viksobdashudras, yeah. those exploited intellectuals and warriors, basically, who have developed the moral courage and the vision to lead the way.
So it's not just about overthrowing, it's about who leads the charge.
And what values guide them. But then the text points out the cyclical nature again, right?
Yes. It doesn't just stop there.
No. The text explains that after this Shudra revolution, perhaps because of its more action-oriented, sometimes even martial character.
Like needing strong leaders to establish order?
Maybe. Leadership often shifts back towards individuals with a atriya mentality. This leads to a new era focused on order, strength, maybe nation building.
And then the cycle continues through vipra and then vaeshya again.
That's the pattern described. It's a reminder that we need to be constantly vigilant against the reemergence of exploitation, even after a successful revolution. Complacency is dangerous.
So where does the text see us now in this cycle?
It argues quite forcefully that capitalist exploitation, the vaeshya dominance, is incredibly widespread globally, and that it's rapidly reaching a point of severe degeneration. It acknowledges that capitalism might have had some initial benefits, maybe spurred innovation or something.
Which are early stages.
But it paints a stark picture of its current state. Words like insatiable rapacity, unbearable hardship, and heartless deprivation are used for many people's experience.
That's strong language.
It is. And the text suggests that countries really burdened by this kind of intense capitalist exploitation are, in a sense, naturally moving towards that Shudra revolution as a response. People eventually reach a breaking point.
It sounds inevitable in that framing.
The pressure builds.
Whoa.
But the text also introduces a really important distinction about the depth and nature of revolution. It's not all the same.
Okay, how so?
It differentiates between what it calls palatial change.
Like changing the palace guard.
Exactly. Think of a change in government, a new leader, but without a fundamental shift in how society operates, how power works, how wealth is distributed, the underlying structure remains.
Surface level.
Right. And then there's pyramidical revolution. This might involve significant social upheaval, maybe even violence, but it still maintains a hierarchical structure. You just get a new elite at the top of the pyramid.
So the shape stays the same, just different people on top.
Precisely. And the text argues that neither of these palatial change or pyramidical revolution truly breaks the cycle of exploitation or leads to lasting positive change in the collective psychology. They don't get to the root.
So what does? What's the alternative?
And this is where the concept of nuclear revolution, this is presented as the real deal.
Nuclear. Sounds powerful.
It implies getting to the core. The nucleus. This isn't just about rearranging the furniture on the deck. It's presented as a complete and total transformation.
Of everything.
Of every single aspect of our collective lives, social structures, economic systems, political frameworks, cultural norms, and even, crucially, our individual and collective psychology and spiritual understanding.
Wow. That sounds incredibly ambitious. Almost utopian.
It's definitely ambitious, but presented as achievable and necessary. The core of this nuclear revolution is the emergence of entirely new values.
What kind of values?
More ethical, more spiritually grounded values. And these new values then drive accelerated social progress in all those areas we just mentioned. It's about fundamentally replacing an old, potentially exploitative collective mindset with a new one that prioritizes well-being, justice, and interconnectedness for all.
And who leads this kind of deep change?
According to the text, the driving force behind this nuclear revolution are these individuals called sadvipras.
Sadvipras. We heard that term before with leadership.
Yes. They're described as individuals who are intellectually developed, courageous, but also deeply connected to a higher consciousness, ethically strong, living for the welfare of all. They reside, metaphorically, at the very nucleus of the social cycle.
So they have the vision and the moral authority.
Exactly. They're the ones who can inspire and mobilize the exploited, not just through anger, but through their moral and spiritual strength and a unified, concerted effort based on a positive vision.
And the text suggests this is actually more efficient.
It does. It suggests this kind of deep transformation, guided by sadvipras, can actually happen with minimum loss of life and property and lead to a much faster positive societal shift compared to purely materialistic revolutions.
Okay, that's a compelling vision, but what needs to be in place for this kind of nuclear revolution to actually happen? It can't just appear out of nowhere.
No, absolutely not. The text lays out several crucial requirements, very practical points.
Like what?
First and foremost, there has to be the undeniable presence of exploitation in some form. People need to see it and feel it.
obvious economic exploitation, like poverty wages or unfair trade.
Yes, that's a big one. But also subtler forms, psychic exploitation, cultural oppression, the manipulation of information, political disenfranchisement.
Can you give examples of those?
Sure. Think about suppressing local languages or cultures, spreading deliberate misinformation to divide people, unfair loan practices that trap people in debt, silencing marginalized voices, flawed education systems. These are all forms of exploitation we see in the world today.
Right. It's not just about money.
Not at all. So that's the first requirement, the presence of recognized exploitation. The second key requirement is a well-organized revolutionary movement.
Organization is key.
Crucial, operating on all levels of society, from local communities right up to national or even global structures, all working in a coordinated way under a central guiding vision.
Why so much emphasis on structure?
The text emphasizes that this robust organizational framework is essential to avoid the fragmentation and, frankly, the failures of many past movements that lacked coordination and clear direction. Structure provides strength and focus.
Okay, exploitation, organization. What else?
The third vital element is a positive and progressive philosophy, a comprehensive ideology.
Not just negative, like anti-everything.
Exactly. It needs to be positive, offering a clear vision for a better future. It should be comprehensive, addressing all aspects of life, not limited by narrow perspectives or rigid dogma.
And practical.
Absolutely. Grounded in practical application, not just abstract theory floating in the clouds. The text even offers critiques of past ideologies, like Marxism and Gandhism, suggesting they had inherent limitations or defects that prevented them from achieving this total transformation.
Interesting. So a strong, positive, practical philosophy, then what?
Building on that, you need dedicated revolutionary cadres.
Cadres, like dedicated workers.
Yes, individuals who are deeply educated in this positive philosophy and who are passionately committed to its goals. They understand the why and the how.
What's their main role?
They are the ones who can connect with the broader population, articulate the vision, inspire them, and channel that desire for change into effective, coordinated action. They're like the intellectual and moral backbone of the movement, translating the philosophy into reality.
Okay, that makes sense. They bridge the ideology and the people.
Precisely. And then there's the critical role of leadership, again, that infallible leadership mentioned earlier.
The said vipras.
Yes. Described as individuals who possess not only physical well-being and intellectual clarity, but also that high degree of spiritual development and ethical integrity. It's presented as a different model of leadership, not based just on political power or economic might, but on moral and spiritual authority.
A higher standard of leadership.
A much higher standard. Finally, the text stresses the necessity of a clear and effective revolutionary strategy.
Strategy. You can't just wing it.
Especially not when you're challenging powerful vested interests. You need a plan to overcome the significant power of those who benefit from the existing exploitative systems.
And this strategy isn't just about, say, military tactics.
No, it's much broader. It involves leveraging moral strength, psychic strength, like collective will and focus, and spiritual strength, alongside strong organization and that compelling ideology. It's a truly holistic approach to creating deep, lasting change.
Wow. Exploitation, organization, philosophy, cadres, leadership, strategy. It's quite a list. It shows the depth required.
It really does. It emphasizes that fundamental change requires more than just anger or wishful thinking. It means conscious, coordinated, and principled effort.
Now, this ties into something else the text really emphasizes, the power of feelings, of sentiments in driving change.
Yes, this is incredibly important. The text argues that every successful revolution, every major social shift, is fueled by a powerful, unifying common sentiment, a shared feeling.
Can you give an example?
Well, it's an interesting point by contrasting sentiments. It looks at something like workers of the world unite, which was certainly powerful for communism for a time.
But limited in scope.
Exactly. It primarily appealed to one class. The text suggests the potential of a truly universal sentiment, something that can connect all of humanity across class, nation, race, everything.
So how do you cultivate that?
It emphasizes tapping into and channeling the existing sentimental legacy of society, the deep-seated values and feelings people already hold, but guiding them towards this broader, more inclusive, universal perspective.
And there's a difference between good and bad sentiments here, right?
A key distinction. The text differentiates clearly between positive and negative sentiments.
Okay, what are positive ones?
Positive sentiments are seen as constructive, unifying, elevating. Examples include a shared desire to end all forms of exploitation. That's a big one. A commitment to positive revolutionary change, strong moral conviction, cultural pride when it's inclusive and respects others, universalism seeing humanity as one family, and a connection to something spiritual or transcendent.
Things that bring people together and lift them up.
Exactly. Negative sentiments, on the other hand, are divisive and destructive. Things like narrow-minded communalism, chauvinistic patriotism, or nationalism that puts one nation above others, provincialism, lingualism, where you discriminate based on language, racism. These tend to fragment society and create conflict.
And the text warns against using these.
Strongly. It cautions against the dangerous misuse of negative sentiments to divide people for political gain, even acknowledging how figures like Hitler tragically exploited these feelings with devastating long-term consequences.
History has grim examples.
It does. The text uses the example of India's independence movement. It suggests that while the anti-colonial sentiment was powerful, if the focus had been even more strongly on the universal anti-exploitation sentiment, fighting injustice for everyone, not just replacing foreign rulers with local ones, it could have fostered even greater and more lasting unity among different groups within India.
That's an interesting perspective. Fight the exploitation itself, not just the exploiter.
Precisely. However, the text also wisely points out a potential limitation. Even a powerful positive sentiment like anti-exploitation might not be enough to sustain long-term unity once the immediate fight against that specific injustice is won. People might drift apart again.
So what's the answer for lasting unity?
This leads to a really profound idea in the text, that the most enduring foundation for global unity lies in the sentiment of recognizing our shared spiritual inheritance.
That's our shared spiritual inheritance. What does that mean?
It's the understanding that fundamentally we are all interconnected, all part of something larger, children of the same supreme consciousness or entity. It transcends all external differences.
And linked to that,
a unifying cosmic ideology. The idea that this supreme entity, this ultimate reality, is the true goal and destination of all life, of all beings.
That's a very universal vision.
It is. The text argues that this deep spiritual sentiment is the only truly lasting basis for universal unity. It can overcome all the divisions that plague humanity and, as a side benefit, indirectly strengthen individual nations by fostering internal harmony based on this shared identity.
So, fighting immediate injustice while building towards this ultimate unity.
That seems to be the core message. Which brings us to what the text considers our primary responsibility, our duty right now.
Okay, what should we be doing according to this?
It's presented as a two-pronged approach, both practical and aspirational. First, we need to actively propagate and strengthen a powerful anti-exploitation sentiment.
Shining a light on all injustice.
Exactly. Covering all forms, physical, psychic, economic, political, cultural, making people aware and making them care.
And the second prong?
To simultaneously share this deeper understanding, the theory of our one shared spiritual inheritance and the unifying cosmic ideology. It's about tackling the immediate problems while building that solid foundation for a truly transformed future.
So address the symptoms and the root cause together.
You got it. The text powerfully emphasizes the severe exploitation faced by economically disadvantaged communities around the world. It stresses the urgent need for movements that empower them to fight for their liberation and achieve genuine economic justice.
It calls for action there.
Absolutely. It reaffirms PROUT's fundamental opposition to all forms of exploitation, but with a particular current focus on economic disparities.
Why the focus on economic right now?
Because of its direct and devastating impact on people's basic needs: food, shelter, healthcare, education. You can't really progress spiritually or intellectually if you're constantly struggling just to survive. Addressing economic exploitation is often the first necessary step.
That makes practical sense.
And it calls for widespread popular movements rooted in these twin sentiments of anti-exploitation and universalism to address the deep-seated socioeconomic problems we face and work towards enhancing the overall well-being of everyone.
It sounds like it offers concrete principles for this.
It does. The text alludes to key principles for truly uprooting exploitation and building a society, things like empowering local communities, ensuring economic decisions prioritize collective interest over narrow self-interest, striving for full employment, guaranteeing basic necessities, and ensuring economic security for all.
Real building blocks for a better system.
Very much so. Ananda Marga is specifically mentioned as an organization actively working to combat exploitation and to bring about a positive revitalization of society based on these kinds of principles.
And it mentioned another type of exploitation. Psychoeconomic.
Yes, that's a really important concept for today's world. Psychoeconomic exploitation. It describes a more insidious, modern form of capitalist exploitation.
How does it work?
It basically weakens people psychologically first, making them more vulnerable before exploiting them economically.
With examples.
Things like systematically undermining local cultures and languages to make people feel inferior, propagating shallow or harmful pseudo-culture through media, imposing restrictions that limit people's potential, especially women, using flawed education systems that don't encourage critical thinking, promoting ideologies that negate people's spiritual or moral core, dharma, deliberately creating social divisions, pushing harmful practices like unethical birth control methods, and controlling media narratives.
Wow, that's subtle but powerful manipulation.
It's a double whammy, attacking the mind and spirit to make economic exploitation easier. And the text argues this needs to be consciously understood and resisted.
So how do we fight that?
The text underscores the urgent need for a powerful, popular movement for intellectual liberation.
Freeing our minds.
Exactly. It calls on thinkers, intellectuals, artists, educators, people who work with ideas to first purify their own minds from dogma and bias.
Lead by example.
Right. Then to genuinely connect with the experiences and struggles of everyday people, bridge the gap between intellectual life and common life. And finally, to actively support movements that are working on the ground to end all forms of exploitation.
It's a call for intellectuals to get involved.
A strong call. Ultimately, the text argues that overcoming all these artificial barriers that divide us, race, nation, class, religion, requires tackling poverty and inequality at its root.
And the first step?
The very first step is to ignite that shared feeling, that powerful, unifying sentiment of outrage against exploitation in all its forms. And base that feeling on the fundamental understanding that the world's resources, the wealth of this planet, are the common inheritance, the common patrimony of all humanity.
Not just for a select few.
Not just for a select few. It's a message of hope, justice, and collective empowerment.
Wow. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've covered a huge amount of ground.
We really have. We journeyed through the cyclical nature of social change, how societies evolve through these different psychological phases.
The critical importance of recognizing and fighting against exploitation in all its guises, not just the obvious ones.
Right, and the inspiring potential of what the text calls a nuclear revolution, that deep, holistic transformation driven by a positive philosophy and dedicated ethical individuals, the said vipras.
And we explored the incredible power of sentiments, both positive and negative, and how harnessing universal and spiritual feelings is key to uniting us and creating a truly just and equitable world.
It's a profoundly progressive and, I think you'd agree, deeply optimistic view of human potential and how we can actively participate in building a much brighter future for everyone.
Absolutely. It's full of that energy and forward-looking perspective we aimed for. We truly hope this deep dive has resonated with you, the listener, maybe sparked some new ways of thinking about the world around you.
Yeah, or perhaps even ignited a sense of possibility, a feeling that positive change really is achievable, despite the challenges we see.
We really encourage you to sit with these ideas. How do they connect with your own understanding of society, your own experiences, your hopes for the future?
And if you're intrigued by this, if you want to explore the philosophy of PROU in greater depth, we really do warmly invite you to look into joining study circles.
Study circles! Tell us more.
They're basically small groups where people get together, discuss these ideas, read the source materials, share perspectives. It's a fantastic way to connect with others who are interested, ask questions, and really deepen your understanding in a supportive environment. You can usually find information about local groups online.
That sounds like a great next step for anyone wanting to learn more. And ultimately, this deep dive reminds us that we all have a vital role to play, don't we?
Absolutely. Wherever you are, whatever your circumstances, think about how you can contribute. Doesn't have to be some grand gesture.
Right. How can you, in your own life, in your community, contribute to creating a more just, equitable, and compassionate world for all? Every action, no matter how small it seems, contributes to that larger movement for positive change.
It really does. The accelerating pace of change we talked about at the beginning, it demands more from us than just passively observing.
It demands participation.
Exactly. It demands that we actively and consciously participate in directing these powerful forces towards a future where exploitation isn't just minimized or managed, but unthinkable. Unthinkable. So maybe the final thought for you to take away is this. What small but meaningful step will you take today towards realizing that truly universal vision?